Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. I just wanted to take a quick second and thank you all for being here. Today we're going to talk about my pathway to the Microsoft SC200 Security Operations Analyst exam and what it's going to take to get there, right? So right now we're on day 16 of studies, and I'm going to take my first try of the exam a little less than a week. So we're going to try to push forward because I think they're going to make some pretty big changes on the 25th of the month, so I want to get it done before they change everything I just studied. So let's dive in. Yesterday we started talking about Microsoft Sentinel, and as I said in my Medium blog for it, which I'll put in the show links, is that I will go back over everything in depth and start doing some video content around what Microsoft Sentinel is and the different security products. But I kind of just wanted to take the 30 days to challenge myself just because I have an end goal. So thought you guys would like the journey and go along with me while we go get a Microsoft cert. So today we're going to go over how to plan and implement for the use of data connectors for ingestion of data sources in a Microsoft Sentinel. And for those that don't know or didn't read or haven't heard of what Microsoft Sentinel is a cloud SIM tool. So it's a security incident and event monitoring tool, right? So it's an aggregator, right? So right now we want to plan for how we're going to ingest that data, because one of the biggest considerations for organizations to take into account when it comes to Microsoft Sentinel and any cloud SIM or SIM in general is your logging, right? What it's going to cost to take the logs to get into that tool for you to take some sort of actions or get alerted on. So with Microsoft Sentinel and for the course of the exam, we need to understand how to identify data sources that to be ingested to Microsoft Sentinel, how to configure and use Microsoft Sentinel connectors for Azure resources, including Azure policy and diagnostic settings, how to configure Microsoft Sentinel connectors for Microsoft 365 Defender and Defender for Cloud, how to design and configure syslog in common event format, also known as CEF event collections, design and configure Windows security event collections, configure threat intelligence connectors. I've seen that on a lot of the question dumps that I've seen, in a lot of the practice tests have always had something around threat intelligence connectors, so I'm going to take a second look into that, and creating custom log tables in the workspace for ingested data storage. So we're going to take a look at all of those, and we're going to start with the best practices for data collection. So with everything in Microsoft, always start with Microsoft Learn content. I literally just take the title for what it's looking for, and I just throw it into Google and see what it brings me. And so for this one, we're looking at the data collection best practices. And so here we want to prioritize your data connectors, right? It's going to tell you everything about the article. For those that haven't seen Microsoft Learn content, you're going to learn everything about the article, and the flow is at the very top, right? So you can go right to it, hyperlinked, right? How to prioritize data, how to filter the logs, right? And how to alternative data ingestion requirements, right? So to prioritize data connectors, right? So there's a document that Microsoft links, right, to learn how to prioritize the data connectors. We'll take a look at that in a second. But what I want to talk about a little bit is Microsoft's Sentinel's kind of pathway for filtering the logs before ingestion, right? It says you may want to filter the logs collected or even log content before the data is ingested into Microsoft Sentinel. For example, you may want to filter out logs that are irrelevant or unimportant to security operations, or you may want to remove unwanted detail from log messages, right? Obviously, the more detailed the log, the bigger it is, the more it costs for ingress, and the more it's going to cost for storage afterwards. So filtering the message content may also be helpful in trying to drive down costs when working with syslog, CEF, or Windows-based logs that may have irrelevant details, right? There's a lot of Microsoft event logs out there that just have a ton of detail, and when it comes to actual security operations, or if that's what you're using Sentinel for, or even event operations, you just don't need that extra detail, right? So Microsoft says to filter the logs, use one of the following methods, right? So either the Azure Monitor Agent, which is supported on both Windows and Linux machines to ingest Windows security events. Filter the logs collected by configuring the agent to collect only specified events. Or we can use tools like Logstash, which supports filtering message content, including making changes to the log messages, right? And there's a whole link about connecting with Logstash. So there's an important little note here. It says using Logstash to filter your message content will cause your logs to be ingested as custom logs, causing any free tier logs to become paid tier, right? So once you use a custom log system, it becomes paid. So it's no longer free logging, so that's a very big consideration to take into account, right? Custom logs also need to be worked into analytic rules, threat hunting, and workbooks, as they aren't automatically added. Custom logs are not currently supported for machine learning capabilities. So a whole bunch in there around if you are going to filter what happens to those filter logs, not only for your cost, but also for your analytics and your SecOps tools in general. So alternative data ingestion requirements, right? So it says standard configuration for data collection may not work well for your organization due to various challenges. The following table describes common challenges or requirements and possible solutions and considerations. I'll also write up a whole medium on this that'll go out later today. But some considerations that I thought were just really interesting right from the beginning is this one around if the challenge is requiring logs filtering, right? If you're going to use Logstash, Azure Functions, Logic Apps, or just custom code in general, if you're filtering using those services, it's not going to be supported on SecOps tools such as UABA, User Enhanced Behavior Analytics, Entity Pages, Machine Learning, or Fusion rules. So it's super important to understand what's not supported by Microsoft Sentinel when it comes to using those different services for filtering, right? And so there's a whole bunch of others, right? So if we look, there's another one. So if servers do not connect to the internet, right, it says use the log analytics gateway, right? And one of the considerations here it has is that configuring a proxy to your agent requires extra firewall rules to allow the gateway to work, right? So that's going to take either more of your knowledge or either a networking team if they're the ones that manage your firewall, just another consideration. And if you need to split operation and security logs, right, use a Microsoft Monitor Agent or Azure Monitor Agent multi-home functionality, right? So it's going to send the logs to 2 different places. And it requires more deployment overhead, right? Because logs are going to be going to 2 different places. And then if it requires custom logs, right, you're going to collect files from specific folder paths, right? Our API ingestion, PowerShell, or different tooling in general, right? Logstash, another log basically splitter, or logs analyzer, right? It may have use filtering logs. Custom methods aren't going to be supported on the back end by Sentinel, and custom connectors may require developer skills, right? So just more overhead to actually deploy the services, which makes it longer to deploy. So let's go back to the top. Let's look and see what we can do from a prioritization, right? It's going to open up a whole different article. In this article, it's going to be covering determining what connectors we need, alternative data ingestion, right, and filtering, right? So we can actually review a whole list of free data connectors. I'll just open that in a new tab so we can cover it in a second. We can review a list of custom data connectors, and we can review the entire list of partner data connectors. And I'll actually pull that up so we have it. So take a look. Alternative solutions and considerations, right? If standard configuration data collection isn't going to be available, there's going to be alternative solutions, right? And so that's one reason why I pulled it up for us to take a look at. Because with the exam, a big thing to consider here is it says identify data sources to be ingested from Microsoft Sentinel, right? So a huge portion of that is understanding what data sources can be used, right? So we need to make sure we know exactly what are the different types of data connectors, not only the partners, not only the custom ones, but also the free, right? Because I could totally see, hey, is this service a part of the free tier, right? So let's go ahead and take a look. So free data sources for Microsoft Sentinel, right, are Azure Activity Logs, Office 365 audit logs, including all SharePoint activity, Exchange admin activity in Microsoft Teams, security alerts, including alerts for Microsoft Defender for Cloud, Microsoft 365 Defender, Microsoft Defender for Office 365, Microsoft Defender for Identity, and Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, Microsoft Defender for Cloud, and Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps alerts. Although alerts are free, the raw logs for some Microsoft 365 Defender, Defender for Cloud Apps, Azure AD, and Azure Information Protection data types are paid. The following table lists data sources in Microsoft Sentinel that aren't charged. This is the same list as log analytics, right? So free data type, right? So we have Azure Activity Logs, we have Azure AD Identity Protection, which is a security alert, right? Office 365, Microsoft Defender for Cloud, Microsoft Defender for IoT, Microsoft 365 Defender, Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, Microsoft Defender for Identity, Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps. And if you look, we have a lot of the free data types are all around security alert. Microsoft 365 Defender includes incident. Office 365 is all Office activity, whether it's SharePoint, Exchange, or Teams. And then also Azure AD Identity Protection is just the security alert. All right. And so it also says in here that for data connectors that include both free and paid types, we can actually select which data types we want to enable when we go to deploy the connector, right? So if we only want the free data, we can actually go in and tell you that, but we have to make sure we're actually looking when we go to deploy that, because that's a huge part of cost, right? A lot of times when we're administering things or we're just putting things into a POC environment, we just start clicking, deploy through things, and we just forget about the cost, and then, we actually start using it live, and we forget to go back and make the changes necessary to reduce costs, and we get a nasty gram from somebody in finance saying, hey, we spent X million dollars that we didn't plan on. What's the reason? We gotta go back and explain it to our boss, and it just becomes a effort that didn't need to be there if we just took it from the first steps. So once again, this table will be in there under the free data sources for Microsoft Sentinel. I'll drop that in the Medium blog, but it's really good to know which sources are there. Once again, Microsoft makes it very, very easy. All right. So, and there's also a little button here so you can see what the excluded tables are. So let's take a look at that, just because I could totally see a question around that. So let's see. Some tables are free from data ingestion charges altogether, right? But this information will always be indicated by is billable column. So there's a column in all the tables on is billable. So there's commitment tiers, right? So in addition to the pay-as-you-go model, Log Analytics has commitment tiers, which can save you as much as 30% compared to the pay-as-you-go price. With commitment tier pricing, you can commit to buy data ingestion for a workspace starting at 100 gigs per day at a lower price than pay-as-you-go pricing. So any usage above the commitment level overage is billed at the same price per gig as provided by the current commitment tier. Cool. Alright, so that's not bad. I don't think there's going to be more questions than just knowing the free data sources, to be honest. I'd be surprised. So let's see. I think we can see what resources we have for creating custom connectors, right? How to create those connectors. So let's see what we have for custom connectors. So we have the following table compares essential details about each method for creating custom connectors described in the article. So we can select the link, of course, right? But for this, I'm just going to review what the connector type is and then the capabilities. So there's codeless connector platform, right? So less technical people with SAS connectors using configuration file. Log Analytics agent. There's Logstash. There's Logic Apps. Logic Apps are super important when deploying Microsoft Sentinel or just using Log Analytics in general. If you're not familiar with Logic Apps but going to deploy Microsoft Sentinel, I really recommend at least watching a few YouTube videos or doing a Udemy course for a few dollars on Logic Apps. It's super important and has a lot of powerful, extensible tools with a no-code environment. PowerShell, self-explanatory. There's Log Analytics API. So if you're a software vendor, or you're trying to integrate a different software vendor, that might be the way. And same about Azure Functions. And then there's different links to each of those custom connectors, right? And there's links to the pages and the articles. So let's see. So here we have all of our different data connectors, right? So we have about 136 different ones with built-in connectors. And so a really cool feature about these built-in connectors in a Microsoft Sentinel is that all of these connectors have already pre-built analytics rules, workbooks, and playbooks. For those that don't know, with Microsoft Sentinel, analytics rules are rules that are written against the connector to create actual alerts, make incidents based on the data that's receiving. Workbooks and playbooks are what takes action, right? Workbooks is the monitor, so it can create reports. So for instance, if I wanted to ingest, let's say, CrowdStrike alerts into Microsoft Sentinel, there would already be actual rules created for that. There would be workbooks with reporting against it. There would be playbooks for taking actions and integrations. So it's a really cool feature, right? And you can find even more data about the connectors in the Azure Marketplace. So you have a full list right from here. So Abnormal, it's a really huge email security vendor out there. Akamai, another cloud. Alibaba Cloud. AWS. We have, let's see if we have any big ones. Airstay Networks, pretty huge. Aruba is very big. ClearPass, right? It's a very big platform. Atlassian, for those that aren't familiar, very big in the project management and agile management space. Auth0. BlackBerry Silence Protect, so if you're out there using Silence, Box, right? Broadcom Semantic DLP, so that's a huge product in the large enterprise space. Cisco, right? All these different products, right? So we have already pre-built connectors. So we have Cisco ASA out there. We have Cisco Duo Security. We have Cisco ICE, Cisco Meraki, Email Gateway, Cisco AMP, UCS, Umbrella, Web Security. I'm not going to look through all of these, but I'm looking through a few to see if I know them. CrowdStrike, Falcon Data, right? So that's really big. CyberArk is huge in the identity and access management space. Darktrace, really big in network monitoring. Exabeam is huge. FireEye is really big, once again, in the enterprise space. Fortinet's huge in all the spaces. Google, let's see what we got. Apogee, cloud platform for GCP. IAM, DNS, workspace. Illumio is also big in the network space. Infoblox. So there's all kinds of different connectors that have pre-built space. So let's pick one. Let's pick AWS. Let's see if we can bring in from AWS. So for AWS, let's take a look. So once you click the article, you can see the connector attributes, right? We're pulling log analytics tables, data collection rules supported by Microsoft, right? So Microsoft built this connection. Log analytics tables the description is CloudTrail, right? So it's pulling all the CloudTrail logs. Super simple. Let's take a look at another more interesting one. Let's try Cisco Meraki. So notoriously, Cisco Meraki is a cloud networking tool, very easy to set up for very small and very lean IT shops. It's gotten huge praise over the last decade almost. I've even used it in previous lives, but it's been very, very difficult for most administrators to use and build into SIM tools, and just to get logs out of it in general has been notoriously a pain. So let's see what we're pulling in. So we got Cisco Meraki connector, allows you to easily connect your Meraki, MX, MR, and MS logs with Sentinel that give you more insight into your organization's network and improve security ops. So log analytics tables, we're pulling in Meraki CL. Data collection rules support no current rules. Microsoft built it. So we can see total, there's already custom queries that are built out, prerequisites. So to integrate with Cisco Meraki, make sure you have Cisco Meraki must be configured to export logs via syslog, so you would configure that on the Meraki portal itself. It's pretty self-explanatory, and there's pretty good documentation around that one. And so it already has vendor installation instructions, right? So whether it's you for your organization building it, or you're working with a vendor to build it, it's got instructions on how to get it done. That's one thing I love about all these, is that if there's a solution out there like this that's pre-built, a built-in connector, Microsoft takes the time to actually build out all of this documentation for you. So it's pretty straightforward to get it into your Microsoft Sentinel. Then from there, it's just using the data that's being ingested to then deliver the results that you're looking for. So it's really, really good and pretty straightforward. So let's see. What else can we take a look at for this level? All right, so I think that's probably it from that one. Let's take a look at configuring Azure, right? So policy. So configure and use Microsoft Sentinel connectors for Azure resources, including Azure policy and diagnostic settings. So let's take a look and just search on that. Yeah, that one. Sometimes you just gotta make the search do a little bit better. Something like that. There we go. So here we go. Connect Microsoft Sentinel to other Microsoft services by using diagnostic settings-based connections. And all these links that I find, I'll also put in the show notes just so we have them to go back and look at. So for this one, right, it says this article is going to describe how to connect Microsoft Sentinel by using diagnostic settings connections. Microsoft Sentinel uses the Azure Foundation to provide built-in service support for data ingestion from many Azure and M365 services. All right, so here's what we need to do. To ingest data in Microsoft Sentinel, you must have read and write permissions for Microsoft Sentinel Workspace. Instructions, right? So this is a great question, because 99% of the time on Microsoft exams, if you never sat for one, what you're going to get is you're going to get either a workflow question, right? An order question. Hey, put this workflow in order if you want to deploy diagnostic, if you want to turn on diagnostic settings to ingest logs into Microsoft Sentinel from other Azure resources? That's an example question, right? Or is this the correct order? Is another example. So for example, we'd have to put this in order. So from Microsoft Sentinel, like what step would you click first? Where would you go, right? Think about that. You'd go to Microsoft Sentinel. You would first click Data Connectors, right? And then you're going to select your resource type from the connector gallery, and then select Open Connector Page, right? And then in the configuration section of the connection page, select the link to open the resource configuration page. And from the resource navigation, you're going to select diagnostic settings. You're going to select add diagnostic setting at the bottom of the list. And in the diagnostic settings screen, enter a name in the diagnostic settings name field. Mark the send to log analytics checkbox, right? And then the two new fields will open below it. And then you're going to, this is key, make sure you choose the correct subscription with the log analytics workspace where Microsoft Sentinel resides. So if you're in an organization that might already have log analytics workspaces, be sure to check that. I've seen many customers accidentally deploy those diagnostic setting solution to the wrong log analytics workspace and then have to go back and rebuild it. And it's a waste of about 30 minutes of people's time, but it's usually in a large organization. That could have been 6 to 7 people, and all of a sudden you wasted a few hours of time, and it just doesn't look great. So for Azure policy, right? Manage diagnostic settings. The prerequisites are read and write. Then to use Azure policy to apply log streaming policy to resources, you must have the owner role for the policy assignment scope. I could totally see a question like, what role must you have to deploy Azure policy diagnostic settings into Microsoft Sentinel? The answer for that would be owner for the policy assignment scope. In the data connector specific requirements, right, for Azure activity, right, the connector now uses the diagnostic settings pipeline. If you're using the legacy method, you must disconnect existing subscriptions from the legacy method before setting up the new Azure activity log connector, right, and it tells you how you're going to do that. From Microsoft Sentinel navigation menu, select data connectors. From the list of connectors, select Azure activity and select the open connector page. Under the instructions tab in the configuration section in step 1, review the list of your existing subscriptions that are connected to the legacy method and disconnect them all at once by clicking the disconnect all button below. And then you continue setting up the new connector with instructions, right? So for Azure DDoS protection, configure Azure DDoS standard protection plan, configure the virtual network with Azure DDoS standard enabled, right? And then the status of Azure DDoS protection, data connector changes to connected only when the protected resources are under a DDoS attack. Right. And the storage account parent resource has with it other child resources for each type, right? So files, tables, queues, and blobs. Basically everything in the storage account will have sub-storage of some kind, if there's anything in it. When configuring diagnostics for a storage account, you must select and configure the parent account resource, exporting the transaction metric, each of the child type resources, exporting all logs and metrics. You will only see storage types that actually have defined resources for. So if there's no resources, you're not gonna be able to select them. So you also get instructions below, right? So connectors of this type use Azure policy to apply a single diagnostic settings configuration to a collection of resources of a single type defined as a scope. You see the log types ingested from a given resource type on the left side of the connector page from the resources under data types, right? So here's the steps, right? So from Microsoft Sentinel, you're going to click Data Connectors per usual, and then you're going to select Open the Connector page. In the configuration page, you're going to select the Launch Azure Policy Assignment Wizard. The Policy Wizard opens. You're going to create the new policy. In the Basics tab, you're going to select the button with 3 dots under Scope to choose a subscription and optionally a resource group. You can also add a description. In the Parameters tab, you're going to clear the Only Show Parameters that require input checkbox. And if you see Effect and Setting Names field, leave them as is. You're going to then choose your Microsoft Sentinel workspace from the Log Analytics workspace dropdown, and the remaining drop-down fields represent the available diagnostic log types. Right, leave marked as true all the log types you want to ingest. The policy will be applied to resources added in the future. To apply the policy on all your existing resources as well, select the Remediation tab and mark Create a Remediation Tag checkbox. In the Review and Create tab, then you're going to click Create per all the other usual. Alright, and so with this data connector, I think this is probably important down here to continue. The connectivity status indicator shows a color stripe in the data connectors gallery and connection icons next to data names. Will show as connected green only if data has been ingested at some point in the past 14 days. Once 14 days have passed with no data ingestion, the connection will show as being disconnected. The moment more data comes through, the connection status will go back to green. right? So it's only in use when it's being used. Super important to know, and I think that's a good place for us to stop for now. I'll be back on later tonight, and we'll go back through some more. Until then, thanks again.